He touched her scar and realized she was hiding something unbelievable. He saw her scar by mistake and uncovered her secret she never expected. Commander Mark Shannon would be the first to admit that this was a terrible idea. We shouldn't. The alluring violet-skinned alien beneath him whispered as his lips traced along her collarbone, fingers moving to the class of her uniform. I'm your superior officer. Alas, he couldn't quite bring himself to care. While he liked to consider himself a man in control of his own faculties, he would admit to at least one vice, the ladies, and it was a vice that only grew in moments of frustration. The last few cycles on this godforsaken trade station had been frustrating indeed. Certainly he hadn't really expected anything from the new propulsion system he designed beyond the utility it might provide for the human fleet, but in light of the interest it had generated, he'd been looking forward to profiting from the patents, and now that plan was dead in the water with nothing to show for it beyond a pat on the back from Fleet Admiral Harrington. So yes, he was frustrated, significantly more than he'd been when he'd chosen to sleep with a Centurion diplomat right under his captain's nose. That had been an equally terrible idea for all sorts of reasons. But that hadn't stopped him then, and it wasn't going to stop him now. Don't tell me you've never had this fantasy, he murmured into her ear, bringing some human officer into your quarters for some discipline. The heated groan he got in response was all the confirmation he needed. The Arcturan whiskey they'd been drinking earlier sat on the desk behind them, now lukewarm but with each glass still half full, a testament to how fast things had developed once he'd made his move, though calling it a move was something of an exaggeration. A little tugging at his uniform, a few heated looks, the odd flirtatious comment, and the rest was history. Lieutenant Commander Nalara moved to speak again before he silenced her with a kiss. She didn't fight, to the contrary, beyond a slight widening of her luminous eyes. There was barely a moment before her tongue was tangling with his, as it did her own hands came up to grasp at his uniform, hands sliding beneath the hem to trail over the hard ridges of his abdomen. Another groan issued forth from the alien, as he was sure she fulfilled some secret desire of hers as her fingers probed at his bare skin there. Cool touch contrasting with the heat of his body. For his own part, he was certainly enjoying the fulfillment of his own clandestine desires as the woman's uniform finally came open, and it was glorious, a long expanse of smooth violet skin punctuated by the womanly curves of two dictable mounds. Certainly Nara was hardly the most endowed woman he'd ever seen, given that she was as spelt as most Proxians tended to be, but that did nothing to curtail Mark's excitement, nor did the rather strictly utilitarian gray undershirt that encased the objects of his affection, though it was hard not to notice the two rather prominent bumps that had tinted the front of said item. Someone's excited, he teased, enjoying the shudder of both embarrassment and pleasure that washed across the alien's features as he gave each sensitive peak a gentle caress. Though the move did seem to allow some degree of awareness to reassert itself in the lieutenant commander's mind, her explorations of his own chest pausing right up until her nails dug in, sending a tingle through him as the sensation bordered somewhere between pain and pleasure. A little Nalara smirked, her eyes glenned dangerously as a wide grin slipped across her features. It's not every day a woman like me finds out one of her officers is a total rogue. It's enough to make me wonder if I should be worried for the discipline of your engineering team. Both surprised and a little excited by the sudden turnabout, Mark found his back pressed against the desk as the proxy and scooted her chair forward, his position on her lap now made slightly precarious as his legs twisted awkwardly, because he'd made sure to keep at least one leg on the ground to support his weight. Unlike a tone Nalara may have been near his own height but nowhere near his frame, he hadn't wanted to crush her. Unfortunately, that meant he was now completely off balance as the alien's fingers twisted his nipples with sadistic glee as she leaned down to lay a small love bite on his exposed shoulder just far enough to be out of sight while he was in uniform so long as he didn't pull at his collar too much. I'd thought the rumors were overblown and that you were a good boy, she murmured into his ear, nibbling at the earlobe. Now, I can't help but wonder if you and those engineers were just better at hiding it. Hardly, he grunted as a hand came down to cup the painfully hard bulge in his pants, the powerful palms sliding over the head possessively. They're all good officers, but that's all they are. Some part of him was torn between just letting the woman dictate the pace in trying to turn the tide. It didn't help that every twitch of the proxy's palm sent lightning up his spine. It also served as a firm reminder that it had been a hot minute since he'd enjoyed any kind of intimacy, self-inflicted or otherwise. He spent most of his day with his team, and he was usually asleep the moment his head hit the pillow in the evening, a routine that left precious little time for a little self-pleasure. Still, decisions on who was about to be top or bottom in this little dance would have to wait as he stared into Nalara's dangerously hungry eyes. I prefer women, not girls. A brief hint of surprise flashed across the older woman's face before her smile managed to grow even wider. A cougar chaser, probably for the best. Those little engineers wouldn't know what to do with a rogue like you, and you do, he taunted. He felt the belt of his pants coming undone under the woman's nimble fingers, which was an impressive feat of dexterity given that her other hand was undoing the buttons of his shirt. Soon enough, both gave way, and the woman slid back to admire her handiwork. Now stood up with his thighs pressed against the desk. Mark felt no shame as he stood there in little more than an open shirt, his pants around his ankles, while his manhood strained against his boxers, positively red with arousal and heart as Durastal. The thing throbbed in the open air, throbbing that only increased as he admired the alien goddess across from him, her gorgeous violet complexion practically glistening under the nearby starlight. Sleek but well-muscled, Mark couldn't help but think of a panther as he took in her taut thighs and tight stomach. Graceful, that was the only word to describe her. Spelt but with undeniably feminine curves. God, he wanted her, and looking at the gleam in her eyes as she stared across at him, he knew the feeling was mutual. Not commander and lieutenant commander, merely a male and a female, or at least that was what he thought. As his hands moved to the band of his boxers. Stop. If the words were a surprise to him, they seemed even more so to the woman who spoke them. But with the words said, the moment seemed to be broken. The spell of lust shattered. We can't, Neller said, her hands moving to pull the open sides of her uniform closed. We can't, she seemed almost trying to convince herself. Mark couldn't help the disappointment. Military discipline or not, he was still human. If he wasn't in this state of affairs, wouldn't have to pass. Are you sure? He asked tentatively. He wouldn't push. That would be his only prompt desire, or not. He had pride enough to limit himself to that much. Stars no. Nara's laugh was practically filled with self-affirmation, her eyes roaming across him once more. But that doesn't mean I'm not right. Deliberately looking to the side, she continued. Put your clothes back on, commander. Sighing internally, Mark couldn't help but smile even as he reached for his pants. You know, being all dutiful is only making you more attractive, not less. Don't, Nylara laughed humorlessly again. My self-control is holding on by a thread here. Honestly, an officer jumping me my own quarters, it's practically out of some trashy hollow vid someone else might have taken that for an invitation, but Mark liked to think he was better than that. Oh, he wouldn't give up. He wasn't that much better because he hadn't been lying. The woman across from him seemed even hotter than ever before. But his next attempt to bed the delicious proxy and wouldn't be here. Not now. She deserved that much. Well, I Applaud your self-control, he said as he buttoned his shirt back up and the love bite on his neck now covered even as. Some part of me laments it, you and me both, Nylara said as she finished. Making herself presentable again moments before she sank into her chair, daring to glance up, it wasn't hard to see both the disappointment, regret, and relief in her eyes as she saw that he was once more decent, at least mostly. His lower half seemed quite unwilling to admit that the moment had passed and was now uncomfortably pressed against his pants, something that wasn't helped by Nara subconsciously wetting her lips when she noticed prior to hastily glancing away. Gods, the things I would do to her, he thought, ignorant of his thoughts. She took a breath, her tone becoming serious. I think it best for both of us that we pretend this little incident didn't happen, recognizing that the woman had slipped back into her role as superior officer. Mark made the executive decision of moving back around her desk to write his own chair before sitting down and nodding yes ma'am. The easy response seemed to surprise the Proxian. Truly, she clearly hadn't expected him to take his rejection well. Likely, she'd been getting ready for a very uncomfortable conversation. He shrugged. As I recall, I initiated this. It'd hardly be fair of me to get into a tiff because you rightfully turned me down. The lieutenant commander actually stared at him for a few seconds after that. That's a surprisingly mature approach, Commander, she coughed, one that is appreciated. Especially as I should have shut the whole thing down the moment it started. Mark resisted the urge to smirk. Yes, she should have, but to be fair to her, how many single officers would have turned down a no-obligation encounter with an attractive colleague, especially if said colleague initiated by literally throwing themselves at said officer? Some, certainly not all, though not even most. Probably, he thought. Sure, he did it daily with his own engineering team, or mostly just Lieutenant Pratt, but there were a number of exceptional factors at play there, not the least of which being that in this corner of the galaxy he, as a man, had all the opportunities he wanted for companionship if he so desired. He liked to think the professional factor would mean his decision to stay away from anything romantic with said officers would remain the case if he had fewer opportunities for release, but as this most recent liaison proved, he was anything but made of iron where women were concerned. That the woman across from him had accomplished the same feat in those circumstances was worthy of respect, even if it took her a minute or two to reach that decision. We're all only mortal, ma'am, he shrugged, and as I said, I definitely initiated it. Something close to irritation flashed across the woman's features now at his blasé attitude. Yes, you won't be reprimanded for this particular incident, as I'm also partially to blame to that end. Once you leave this room, we shall forget all about this. I will be the lieutenant commander once more, and you the commander. She eyed him. Because you can rest assured that if the choice comes down to resigning my position or allowing an officer to buck discipline because of a shared incident, I shall not hesitate to take the former path. At her words, Mark allowed all levity to leave his face as he looked at her with the utmost seriousness. It won't come to that, ma'am. I can separate work from play. As you said, beyond those doors you shall be the lieutenant commander, and I the commander. Nylara nodded, though she paused a little at his word choice before shaking her head. Very well, you may leave now, Commander. If you hurry, you should make it back to your quarters before the night cycle begins. Standing up at her dismissal, Mark was thankful for the fact that his little man had finally admitted defeat, as the lack of a bulge in his pants made things significantly more comfortable as he made for the door, though he did pause at the threshold. Ma'am, the Proxian glanced up from the data pad she'd just been about to pull out, though there was no missing the stiffness of her movements nor the fact that she flushed slightly as she looked at him. Yes, Commander. Her words were cautious, which only made Mark smirk internally as he kept his features entirely professional. With that said, if we are to Beat no more than lieutenant commander and commander beyond the walls of your quarters. Does that mean we might be more? Within them, allowing himself one final smirk at the aliens, gobsmacked and slightly flushed, and not with anger. If he didn't miss his mark expression, he stepped out of her quarters and into the corridor. That was a bad idea, he thought. As he made his way through the halls, yet he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Oh, he'd certainly failed in his first attempt to bed his delightful superior officer, but their tour of duty was far from over. As he turned the corner, a flash of movement caught his eye. In his distracted state, he collided with someone hard. They both stumbled, and as he reached out to steady the other person, his hand brushed against bare skin, exposed violet skin. "I'm so sorry. I wasn't." His words died in his throat as he realized it was Nelara, her uniform partially open at the back where she'd been adjusting something, and there, it was, a geometric pattern etched into her skin, unlike anything he'd ever seen. A scar, clearly, but with perfect lines and angles that couldn't possibly be natural. Her eyes widened in horror as she realized what he'd seen. In an instant, she pulled her uniform, closed her face, a mask of panic. "Please," she whispered, "forget what you saw." But how could he? That pattern wasn't just any scar, it was something else entirely. Something she'd been hiding, something that would change everything between them. Mark couldn't sleep. The geometric pattern on Nella's back haunted him, perfect angles and symmetrical lines that couldn't possibly be natural. He'd seen battle scars, ritual markings, and even decorative scarification from a dozen different species, but nothing like this. He set up in his quarters, the station's artificial night cycle casting everything in dim blue light. His terminal glowed as he scrolled through the limited information on Proxian physiology available in the human database computer. Any information on proxy and cultural markings or scarification rituals. Limited data available. The synthetic voice responded, "Proxy and cultural practices are largely undocumented due to restricted access granted to non-proxians." Of course, the Proxians had only joined the Galactic Alliance 15 years ago, and they remained one of the most secretive member species. Their technological contributions had been invaluable, particularly in propulsion systems. Ironically, the very field Mark specialized in. He rubbed his eyes and checked the time. 300 hours. He had a duty shift in 5 hours, but sleep seemed impossible now. The look of absolute terror in Nalara's eyes kept replaying in his mind. Computer access personnel file. Lieutenant Commander Nalara accessing. Warning, full access to personnel files requires alpha clearance. Display publicly available information. Only the screen filled with Nara's service record. Impressive, but suspiciously vague. Graduated top of her class at the Proxian Science Academy. Served aboard 3 vessels before being assigned to this station. Combinations for exceptional service without specific details. Nothing about her personal life or background. A knock at his door startled him. Computer, who's at the door? Lieutenant Commander Nara. His heart raced. He quickly closed the files and straightened his t-shirt. Enter. The door slid open to reveal Nara, still in uniform despite the late hour. Her lavender hair was pulled back, severely emphasizing the sharp angles of her face. Her luminous eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his mouth go dry. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside and letting the door close behind her. "I was just thinking the same thing." She paced his quarters, her movements tense and controlled. "You saw something you shouldn't have." "I didn't mean to," he said, rising from his chair, "but I can't unsee it either." "You could try," she suggested, her voice tight. "Is that what you want for me to pretend I didn't see anything?" He stepped closer. "Because the look on your face told me this isn't just about privacy. You were terrified." "Nara," she flinched at his use of her name. "Without rank, you don't understand what's at stake." "Then help me understand." He gestured to the small sitting area. "Please." After a moment, hesitation, she sat on the edge of the couch, her posture rigid. Mark took the chair opposite her, giving her space. "What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room," she said. "If it does, both our lives are forfeit." The gravity in her voice sent a chill down his spine. "I understand." "No, you don't," she snapped, then closed her eyes, composing herself. "The mark you saw is called a vexus pattern. It identifies me." As she paused, searching for words in your terms, "a genetically modified individual mark's brow furrowed. Genetic modification is common enough. Why they secrecy? Not like this, huh?" Her fingers twisted together in her lap. "I was part of a military program. The proxy and high command created soldiers with enhanced abilities, strength, speed, intelligence, endurance. The program was deemed too dangerous and officially terminated 20 years ago. Officially," it continued, "underground. I was 12 when they took me." Her voice remained steady, but her eyes held shadows. "The pattern you saw is both a marker and a control mechanism. It's integrated with my nervous system." Mark felt sick. "Control mechanism? You mean it can cause extreme pain or paralysis if activated by the right frequency?" She looked away. "Or death?" "Jesus," he whispered, "and the proxy and government did this too. Children, a faction within our military. When the Alliance discovered hints of the program 5 years ago, the proxy government officially condemned it and executed the known leaders." Her mouth twisted. "But they didn't free us. Were considered state secrets too dangerous to be acknowledged. If I'm discovered, I'll be eliminated. To preserve diplomatic relations." The implications staggered him. "How many of you are there?" "I don't know anymore. We were separated after training. Some died during the procedures, others during missions." Her voice grew distant. "I escaped during a diplomatic mission 3 years ago and altered my records. I've been hiding in plain sight ever since." Mark leaned forward. "Why are you telling me this? You could have denied everything." Her eyes met his, vulnerability mixing with determination. "Because I've been watching you, Mark. You're a good man, and because..." She hesitated. "I'm tired of running, tired of being alone with this." The admission hung in the air between them. Mark felt the weight of her trust in the danger it represented. "The officials arriving tomorrow," he said, realization dawning. "They're not just here for the trade negotiations, are they?" She shook her head. "There have been rumors of escaped assets in this sector. I don't know if they're looking specifically for me, but they'll have scanners that can detect the vex's pattern. Then we need to get you off the station. There's nowhere to go. Proxy and agents have access throughout Alliance space." Mark stood, mind racing. "There has to be a way to remove or disable the pattern, don't you think I've tried?" Bitterness edged her voice. "It's integrated with my spinal column. Attempting removal would kill me." He paced, and the engineer in him refusing to accept an unsolvable problem. "What about masking it, blocking the frequency?" A flicker of hope crossed her face. "Theoretically possible, but I'd need specialized equipment, which I might be able to get," he said, thinking of his contacts in R&D, "but we'd need time." She stood suddenly close enough that he could smell the faint exotic scent of her skin. "Time is the one thing I don't have." The proximity between them reignited the tension from earlier. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, the attraction between them felt stronger than ever. Her revelation had created an intimacy more profound than physical desire. "I won't let them take you," he said, his voice low and fierce. Her hand reached up to touch his face, her cool fingers tracing his jawline. "Why would you risk everything for someone you barely know?" "Because what they did to you was wrong." His hand covered hers. "And because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the day we met." The admission surprised them both. Her eyes widened, then softened. "Even before you saw my back, long before that," he confirmed, a small smile breaking through the tension. "Though I have to say, mysterious alien super soldier does make you even more intriguing." A startled laugh escaped her. "You're impossible." I Prefer determined. His thumb traced circles on her palm. We'll figure this out, Nara. Together the words seemed to affect her deeply. She stepped closer, the last barriers between them crumbling together. She repeated like she was testing an unfamiliar concept. I've never had that before. When their lips met this time, it wasn't the heated rush of their earlier encounter. It was slower, deeper. A promise. Her arms wound around his neck as his encircled her waist, drawing her against him. The station's calm system chimed, shattering the moment. Attention, all senior officers, proxy and diplomatic. Vessel Stellar Accord has arrived ahead of schedule. Command staff report to docking bay 3 and 30 minutes to receive the delegation. They broke apart, reality crashing back their early. She whispered, fear returning to her eyes. Mark's mind shifted to tactical mode. We have half an hour. That's enough time to get you somewhere safe while I assess the situation. Where they'll scan the entire station, he thought quickly. The maintenance tunnels in Section 12, the lead shielding blocks most scans. It was why we can't use standard comms down there. Hope and doubt warred on her face. And then what then? I find out exactly what they're looking for, he said, already moving to his storage unit for an extra communicator, and we figure out our next move. As they prepared to separate, Nyler caught his arm. Mark, thank you. He pulled her close for one more brief, fierce kiss. Stay safe. I'll find you when I can. As she slipped out of his quarters, Mark knew his life had irrevocably changed. Whatever happened next, there was no going back to the way things were. The hunt had begun. Mark straightened his dress uniform, the stiff collar uncomfortable against his neck, as he joined the other senior officers in their reception line. The docking bay had been hastily transformed into a welcoming area with station flags alongside proxy and banners in deep indigo and silver. Station Commander Harrington nodded approvingly as Mark took his position. Commander Shannon cutting it close. Sorry, sir, last minute preparations. Not entirely a lie. He'd spent the last 20 minutes rigging a modified scanner into his uniform cuff, calibrated to detect the specific frequencies Nar had described. If the Proxians had technology to activate the Vexus pattern, he needed to identify it. The airlock cycled open, and the Proxian delegation emerged, 3 males and 2 females, all with a characteristic violet skin and light hair of their species, though their features seem more angular than Nalaras. They wore a formal attire, flowing robes in deep blues with intricate silver geometric patterns that reminded Mark uncomfortably of the scar on Nira's back. The lead diplomat, Ambassador Torrens, stepped forward with a practiced smile. Commander Harrington, the proxy in hegemony extends its gratitude for your accommodation of our early arrival. The pleasure is ours. Ambassador, may I introduce my senior staff? As introductions proceeded down the line, Mark studied the delegation. Behind the ambassador stood a stern-faced male whose robes, while diplomatic in style, couldn't disguise his military bearing. His eyes constantly scanned the room. Security assessment. The 2 females appeared to be aides, but one carried what looked like a data tablet that Mark's scanner immediately flagged. When his turn came, Mark bowed slightly. Commander Mark Shannon, Chief Engineer. Ambassador Torrens' eyes lit with interest. Ah, the propulsion specialist. Your work has been noted by our science ministry. You honor me. Ambassador, the military officer stepped forward. Commander Shannon, I am Security Consul Valon. I understand your engineering section extends throughout the station. It does. We maintain the station's systems from central hubs in each sector. Fascinating. Perhaps you might provide a tour later. I have a particular interest in human engineering approaches. Mark smiled pleasantly while his mind raced. Of course, though I should warn you, it's not as glamorous as diplomatic work. The female with the tablet stepped closer, and his scanner registered a stronger signal. I would be interested as well. I'm scientific. At mirror, the more, the merrier, Mark replied, maintaining his easy demeanor despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. the device she carried was definitely emitting frequencies in the range Nara had described. Commander Harrington led the delegation toward the station's conference room. Leaving Mark momentarily alone, he tapped his communicator twice, the signal he'd arranged with Nalara to indicate danger. The reception that followed was excruciating. Mark circulated through the room, engaging in polite conversation while keeping the Proxian delegation in his peripheral vision, and scientific 8C mirror never strayed far from her tablet, and twice he caught her discreetly scanning the room. He managed to position himself near enough to overhear a conversation between Valen and the ambassador. No indications yet, Valen was saying quietly, but the station's design provides numerous hiding places. We have limited time, Torin replied. The Alliance representatives arrive in 3 days. This matter must be resolved before then the tracker is functioning. If the asset is aboard, we will find it. Asset, not her. It. The casual dehumanization made Mark's blood boil. He approached with 2 glasses of the Arkshuran whiskey being served. Ambassador Consul, may I offer you a drink? It's from my personal reserve. Torin accepted with a diplomatic smile. Most kind Commander. Valen declined with a curt gesture. I prefer clarity of mind, a wise policy. Mark agreed, though sometimes a different perspective can reveal solutions to complex problems and interesting philosophy. When Torin said, is that the human approach to engineering challenges as well? Absolutely. We have a saying, when conventional methods fail, try the unconventional. Your species' adaptability is remarkable. The ambassador observed. It's why the Alliance values human ingenuity, despite your relatively recent arrival on the galactic stage. Mark inclined his head. We're still learning, but we bring fresh eyes to old problems. Indeed. Torin's gaze sharpened. I understand you work closely with Lieutenant Commander Nara. I don't see her this evening. The question seemed casual, but Mark felt the trap. She's overseeing critical maintenance. The station's deep core systems require constant attention. A pity. I was hoping to meet all senior staff. I'm sure she'll be available tomorrow. Mark lied smoothly. She mentioned looking forward to the cultural exchange portion of your visit. Vin's eyes narrowed slightly. The Lieutenant Commander is Proxian. Is she not curious that she would need cultural exchange with her own people? She's been stationed here for some time, Mark replied, and she's mentioned that proxy and customs evolve rapidly. She's eager to reconnect with current trends before Valen could press further. Commander Harrington called for attention to formally welcome the delegation. Mark used the opportunity to slip away, making a show of checking his communicator as if receiving a message. He nodded apologetically to his superior and exited the reception. Once in the corridor, he moved quickly toward the maintenance tunnels, checking repeatedly to ensure he wasn't followed. The tunnels were dimly lit and humming with the station's mechanical heartbeat. He navigated the maze-like passages until he reached the junction they'd agreed upon. Nara, he called softly. She emerged from the shadows, tension evident in every line of her body. What did you learn? They're definitely hunting for assets. The female Adash has some kind of tracking device. He showed her the scanner readings. It's emitting frequencies that match what you described. Nalara Pald Vexus activator. They can use it to incapacitate me, or worse, they don't know you're here yet. But they're suspicious about your absence. He took her hands, which were cold to the touch. We need to neutralize that device. How? We can't just steal it. No, but I might be able to disrupt it. His mind was already calculating possibilities. If I can get close enough to analyze its exact frequency pattern, I could create a countermeasure. She shook her head. Too dangerous. They'll be watching you now. They've requested an engineering tour tomorrow. It's the perfect opportunity, and if they detect your scanner, or worse, if they activate a wide range pulse while searching, Mark, it would paralyze me instantly. He squeezed Her hands, then we need to get you further away. The station's outer ring has independent systems, and better yet, it's scheduled for maintenance tomorrow. No one will question sealed sections. Relief flickered across her features, quickly replaced by determination. I can make it there through the external access tubes. I'll bring supplies tonight. He checked the time. I need to get back before they notice I'm gone too long. She caught his arm as he turned to leave. Mark, why are you doing this? You're risking everything. The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken implications. In the dim light, her violet skin seemed to glow, her eyes luminous with vulnerability that cut straight to his core. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply, then with a half smile, and because I've never been good at walking away from a beautiful woman in distress. Her expression softened, and she stepped closer. Is that all I am to you? A damsel in need of rescue? You know it's not. His voice dropped lower as the space between them disappeared. You're brilliant, fierce, and frankly terrifying in all the best ways. A smile tugged at her lips. Terrifying, absolutely. His hands found her waist. I haven't been able to think straight since I met you. That sounds like a tactical disadvantage, Commander. Worth it, he murmured just before their lips met. The kiss deepened quickly. Months of tension and the adrenaline of danger fueling a hunger neither could deny. Her body pressed against his cool, against his human warmth, creating an intoxicating contrast. His hands traced the curve of her spine, carefully avoiding the area where he knew the scar lay. She broke the kiss, breathing hard. This is madness, probably, he agreed, resting his forehead against hers, but I'm beginning to think madness is underrated. A distant clang echoed through the tunnels, and they sprang apart instantly. Alert, go, she whispered. I'll be fine, he nodded reluctantly. Outer ring, section 47. I'll come as soon as I can. As he made his way back toward the reception, Mark knew he was crossing a line from which there would be no return. For a woman he barely knew, he was risking his career, possibly his life, and somehow it felt like the most natural decision he'd ever made. And this is our primary power distribution hub, Mark explained, leading the proxy and officials through the engineering section. We've modified the Standard Alliance design to accommodate the station's unique position within the planet's crust. Scientific attaché Mira ran her fingers along a control panel, the tablet device still clutched in her other hand. Fascinating adaptation. The thermal regulation must be challenging, that's putting it mildly, Mark replied with a practiced smile. We essentially floated in a sea of magma. Makes for excellent power generation, but keeps my engineers on their toes. And the security console. Volan had remained mostly silent throughout the tour, his eyes constantly scanning each room. Now he stepped forward. These maintenance tunnels, they connect to all sections of the station. Most of them, some areas are compartmentalized for safety. Mark pointed to a schematic on the wall. The outer ring, for instance, has independent systems in case of emergency. I see. Balan exchanged a glance with Mira. And is that where maintenance is currently being performed? The casual question sent warning signals through Mark's mind. Yes, routine calibration of the thermal shields should be completed by tomorrow. Mira's tablet emitted a soft chime, and she quickly silenced it. Commander Shannon, your station design is truly remarkable. Might I examine the environmental control systems more closely? I have a particular interest in atmospheric recycling. Of course. Mark led them toward the environmental section, his mind racing. The chime from her tablet couldn't be coincidence. Had they detected something? Was Nalara safe? As they walked, his communicator vibrated against his wrist. Commander Harrington requesting his immediate presence. Perfect timing. I apologize, he said, displaying the message. It seems my commanding officer needs me. My deputy, Lieutenant Park, can continue your tour. Valen's eyes narrowed. Most unfortunate. I had several more questions for you specifically. I'm sure Lieutenant Park is Equally qualified to answer them, if you'll excuse me. Mark nodded to Park, who had appeared at his signal, then strode away before they could object further. Instead of heading to Harrington's office, however, he took a circuitous route to a maintenance access point, slipping inside once he confirmed no one was watching. The narrow tunnels would take him to the outer ring faster than the main corridors. His communicator buzzed again, this time with a message from Nilara. They're scanning. Move now, cursing under his breath.